Sa panahon ngayon na mahirap tukuyin ang totoo sa kasinungalingan at sa panahon na ito na lantad at malinaw ang pekeng balita, kailangan ng programang tutugon dito, dala ang liwanag ng katotohanan. Samahan si Pastor Arnel Resurreccion sa isang oras na talakayan na pagsisiwalat ng katotohanan na ang batayan ay ang salita ng Diyos sa programang Usapang Totoo. Tuwing Biyernes, alas 2 hanggang alas 3 ng hapon, dito sa Kaakibat ng Diyos para sa Bayan, DZJV 1458 Radyo, Calabarzon. Usapang Totoo.
Kayo ba ay may mga katanungan at hindi alam kung sinong makakasagot? Tara, magkape tayo at magkwentuhan upang madagdagan ang kaalaman. Dito lang sa Kape, Kwento at Kaalaman. Kasama sina Kuya Richie at Ate Chat. Tuwing Sabado, alas 2 ng hapon, dito sa DZJV 1458 Radyo, Calabarzon.
Mga kaakibat, halina't sumabay sa himig ng tugtuging pagsamba na magpaparinig sa atin ng tibok ng puso ng Panginoon at mag-umpisang magpuri sa Kanya. Kinig-nuod at makiawit sa programang Heart of Worship. Kasama sina Pastor David Valencia at Pastora Sweet Ferro. Tuwing Sabado, alas 11 ng umaga hanggang alas 12 ng tanghali. Dito lang sa DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon. Kaakibat ng Diyos para sa bayan. Naghahatid ng napapanahong impormasyon at inspirasyon para sa buong Calabarzon. Tagasulong ng mga proyektong pangkaunlaran para sa katagumpayan ng bawat mamamayan. Himpilang naglilingkod sa Diyos at sa bayan. DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Teaching the Bible. I'm your host Michael Koch. Teaching the Bible is a weekly radio and television program that explains and details the main events that take place in the Bible as we progressively move forward through the Bible week by week. Now last week the main events that we covered was Cain and Abel, Noah and the Ark, the Tower of Babel, and we got into Abraham. And again, one of the main things about Abraham is tests of faith that God put him through. We learned about the first one that he passed last time we met, which was at 75. God appeared to him and said, Abram, his name was Abram at the time, God didn't change it yet. Abram, I want you to move to a land that I'm going to tell you where to go to. And if you do this, you'll be blessed exceedingly by me. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grain of sand on the seashore. And at 75, Abram had faith in and followed God. He just picked up where he was and he left. Now, it's a big test of faith because he left his whole home behind and went somewhere. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know why exactly he was going, but he did because God told him to. And we're going to learn about two more big faith tests today of Abram. One he didn't really pass, but the second one he passed was the hardest one ever. In my opinion, possibly the hardest test of faith in the Old Testament. You know, it doesn't include Jesus, but in the Old Testament. And he passed that. And then we're also going to learn today about his son Isaac and Isaac's son Jacob and a few other major players in the Bible. So let's get started. When God first appeared to Abram, he told him that he would give Abram and his wife Sarai children. Abram was now 85 and Sarai was 75, and they did not yet have any children. You can read that in Genesis chapter 16, verse 15. Because of this, Sarai told Abram that he should take her servant Hagar and have a second wife, have a child with her. You know, she thought, Abram, God promised us these kids. And look, I'm 75 and you're 85 and it doesn't look like we're going to have any because we're too old in the natural. So, you should, take my servant as a second wife and have a child with her and that could be your heir. And Abram said, okay. So he took Sarai's servant Hagar and married her. He had a second wife now, which can cause problems, of course. And he had a child with her. And they named this son, that they had a son. He had a son with Hagar, and they named him Ishmael. Now, having a second wife caused a lot of conflict between Hagar and Abraham's first wife, Sarai. Sarai began to mistreat Hagar. Now, the angel of the Lord came to Hagar, who was miserable because of this. He told Hagar that her son Ishmael would have countless offspring, but he himself would be a rebellious man when he grew up. And you could read that in Genesis chapter 16. God appeared to Abram now later, because this happened when Abram was 85 and Sarai was 75, when they both thought, God promises kids, but he doesn't, I don't think he's coming through it. So let's take matters into our own hands. That happens a lot in the Old Testament. God will promise something and people don't think God's going to do it. So they decide to take matters into their own hands and they mess it up. Again, one of the reasons why we study the Bible is to learn from it and how to live our lives. We learn from what people do. They do something, a certain thing in the Bible, and has a great outcome with God, then do that. They do something in the Bible that has a bad outcome, then we learn from that, don't do it, okay? And when God, tells you that God is going to do something for you, if it doesn't seem to be working out the way God told you, be careful in trying to take matters into your own hands. So that happened when Abram was 85 and Sarai was 75. Now, God came back 14 years later. And Abram now is 99 years old, and Sarai was 89. God told him again, Abram, that if he followed God, he would make a great nation out of his descendants. Kings would be his offspring, and God would give them the land of Canaan as their everlasting possession. Now, God made a covenant with Abram on this promise. For Abram's part, every male offspring would be circumcised throughout generations. God then changed Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah. God told Abraham that he would have a son with his wife Sarah, who is now she's 89. She would be 90 when she would have this son. And this son that Sarah would have at 90 would be the heir that God would establish his covenant through of making a great nation of Abraham. The next year, it happened as God said it would. Sarah had Abram's son at age 90, and he was 100. They named his son Isaac. That's in Genesis chapter 17, verse 18 and 21. Now, this is a great learning lesson for Abraham. And a learning lesson is, man, if God promised something, even if it seems impossible to me in the natural, God is supernatural, and he can make supernatural things happen, even if it looks impossible in the natural. And it's going to come into play in a big way in the next event in Abraham's life. God puts Abraham to a great test to see if Abraham will trust and follow God. So Abraham's son Isaac grew into an older boy, and Abraham and Sarah loved Isaac very much. God put Abraham to the most difficult test to see if Abraham would follow God and what he instructed him to. God told Abraham to take his son, his only son Isaac, into the mountain in the land of Moriah, and once there, to offer him as a sacrifice to God. He basically said, Abraham, I want you to take your son Isaac and kill him, sacrifice him to me. Abraham listened to God and trusted that somehow God would make everything okay. Now again, this is a blind faith trust in God, and it would be the impossible. And let me explain this. Now, God promised Abraham now, changed the name to Abraham. God promised Abraham that I will give you countless descendants through your son Isaac, right? Isaac did not have any children yet. He was still a young man or older boy, and he wasn't married, didn't have any children yet. So if Abraham sacrificed Isaac, how could then Isaac produce all of Abraham's offspring that God promised him? It would be impossible. If Isaac's dead, how could he produce these offspring God promised him? Impossible in the natural. Just as impossible as it was for his 90-year-old wife Sarah to have a son at 90. Abram learned through that event of his wife having a son at 90 when they doubted that God would do that God could do anything he says he's going to do because he's God. And if God promised Abraham that he would give him a son through Isaac, now he's asking God is asking him to sacrifice Isaac to him. Somehow, God will make this happen, give him descendants through Isaac, even though it looks impossible to him. So Abraham took his son Isaac, whom he loved very much, on a several-day journey to the place God instructed him to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice. When they got there, Abraham bound Isaac and laid him on the altar that he made, and he pulled out a knife to kill Isaac like God instructed him to. As Abraham lifted up his knife to sacrifice Isaac, God immediately went to Abraham and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And Abraham said, "Here am I, God." And God said, and this is so important, what God said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son." Now he says this twice, your only son. "Seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your children and grandchildren as the stars of heaven and the sand that is on the seashore. And in your children and grandchildren shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." God said that in Genesis chapter 22, verse 11 to 18. God was testing Abraham. Of course, God would never actually have somebody kill their son. God never asked somebody to sacrifice anybody, He's not that kind of a God, but he just wanted to see if Abraham would faithfully follow him, and Abraham was going to do it. Now, God said twice, "Seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son," okay? I want you to consider something. Is it possible that because God was able to find just one man out of everybody who lived on the earth, to find just one man that was willing to sacrifice their only son because they love God, did that help God make the decision that he would actually sacrifice his only son because he loved man? Something to think about. Because Abraham trusted God and tried to do this most difficult task that God asked him to do, which is to offer up his only son to God, God would later make it so that Abraham's children and grandchildren would be the ones who would found the country of Israel. Additionally, one of Abraham's descendants would be Jesus, who would save the world from their sins. And that could be how, in God's statement to him, "And in your children and grandchildren shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." Well, one of his offspring down the road would be Jesus. He blessed the whole world. He saved the whole world from their sins. So that came true too. Now we're going to learn more about Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham's son Isaac grew into a man, and he married a woman named Rebekah. Now Rebekah was unable to have any children, so Isaac prayed to God that he would grant them children. God answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins, with 2 sons. The sons fought with each other inside of Rebekah's womb. She asked God why this was so. God answered Rebekah's prayer and question, telling her, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." And God told Rebekah that in Genesis chapter 25, verse 23. At the twins' birth, the first one came out covered in red hair, and they named him Esau. The second son came out holding Esau's heel, and they named him Jacob. They're fighting in the womb, these 2 twins, and even on the way out, they're fighting and grabbing at each other. As they grew up, Esau became an outdoorsman and a skilled hunter, while Jacob was a quiet man who dwelled in tents. Isaac loved Esau because of the food he hunted, but Rebekah loved Jacob. You'll see this happens repeatedly in Abraham's descendants. They have a very bad and wrong habit of parents loving some sons more than other sons openly, and it causes major problems. As parents, don't do that. Love all your children equally. Now, you might have to treat them differently based on how they act and what they do, but you don't openly, "I love you more than you." Well, this family did that, and you'll see the problems it caused. Now one day, Jacob, they're older now, was cooking stew. Esau came in and was very hungry, and he asked for some stew. Jacob said he would give him stew, but only if Esau gave him his birthright for it. Esau said, look, I'm starving to death. I'm hungry. I want some stew. What good is a birthright if I starve to death? Yeah, here, you could have my birthright. Now just give me some stew. So the Bible says Esau despised his birthright in Genesis chapter 5 or 25, verse 34. He didn't really think much of it. He would trade it in for a bowl of stew. Now, over time, their father Isaac became very old and he grew blind, and Isaac believed that he might die soon. So he called his firstborn son Esau and told him to go and hunt and make him a meal out of it, and afterward he would give him the blessing due to the firstborn son. Isaac's wife Rebekah heard this conversation. She told Jacob what his father said to his brother and said, listen, this is what I want you to do. I want you to get the blessing. Because remember, Rebekah wrongly loved Jacob more as a son, and Isaac wrongly loved Esau more as a son and caused problems. She said, listen, I heard what your dad said, Isaac. This is what I want you to, I'm sorry, I heard what your dad said, Jacob. This is what I want you to do. Go and get 2 young goats from our flock, and I'm gonna cook them up and make a meal out of them. And I'm gonna dress you up like Esau, and you're gonna go in, and your father's blind, and you're gonna pretend to be Esau, giving him this meal that he asked for, and he's gonna give you the blessing, because I want you to have it instead of Esau. Well, Jacob didn't think this was a good idea, and he didn't think it was gonna work. He said, Mom, this isn't gonna work. First of all, I don't sound like Esau, and Esau's all hairy. I know Dad's blind, but he's all hairy, and my skin is smooth. If he just reaches out and touches me, he's going to know that I'm not Esau, and he's going to wind up cursing me instead of blessing me. But she just kept insisting, no, just do what I say. Just do what I say. So he said, okay. So Rebekah made the meal. She dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes that he would smell like Esau. And then she put animal pelts on his arms. So if Jacob would reach out and, if Isaac would reach out and touch him, he'd feel hairy and think that he's Esau. Now, when Jacob brought the food into Isaac and asked for the blessing for the firstborn son, Isaac got a little disturbed. He's like, wait a minute, you're saying you're Esau, but you sound like Jacob. He's like, no, I'm Esau. How would I know about this deal we made? You know, you made this deal, go out and hunt and make you a meal. He said, come here, let me touch you. And Isaac touched Jacob's arm, and it felt hairy because he had the animal pelts on. He said, well, you don't, okay, all right. And he tricked him, and he believed that he was actually Esau. And then Isaac gave Jacob this blessing, which is meant for the firstborn son. And this is the blessing that Isaac gave to Jacob. He said, may God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. And Isaac said that in Genesis chapter 27, verse 26-29. Yeah, you might have heard the saying before, blessed are those who blessed Israel, and cursed are those who cursed Israel. This is where it comes from, the original, right here. Now, as soon as Jacob received the blessing from his father Isaac and left, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He prepared his father a meal and brought it into him and asked for the firstborn blessing. Isaac said, he got scared and said, Who are you? I was already given a meal for my son Esau, and I gave him my blessing. Esau said, I'm your son Esau. Jacob tricked me. And Esau realized what happened and cried out in bitter agony and begged his father Isaac for a blessing. Isaac said that he made Jacob lord over Esau in his blessing, and he doesn't have another blessing for Esau. Esau was weeping and kept begging for a blessing from Isaac, and Isaac only had this to say to him. He said, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword shall you live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. That's in Genesis chapter 27, verses 39-40. Well, Esau hated Jacob because he tricked him out of the firstborn blessing. Now, he did trick him, but remember also Esau earlier traded in his firstborn, the rights of the firstborn, for a bowl of stew, So now when actually Jacob cashed it in and said, I'm going to take your firstborn Right to the firstborn you gave me for stew. Now he's mad and he wants to kill him. Esau started saying out loud, he was so angry at Jacob that after their father Isaac dies, that Esau is going to kill Jacob. Well, their mother Rebekah found out about Esau's intentions, and she sent Jacob to live with her brother Laban in the land of Haran until hopefully Esau's anger subsides. You can read that in Genesis chapter 27, verses 30 to 46. Now Esau later married a daughter of Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar, who was cast out. God came to Jacob in a dream and told him that he made a promise to his grandfather, Abraham, that his descendants would be many and they would form a great nation, starting with Jacob's sons. Now, so Jacob is living now with his uncle Laban, and his uncle Laban it seems like his mother's brother. And I guess that whole side of the family was a bunch of manipulators. First of all, the name Jacob means trickster, okay? People would give names in the Bible that had meaning to them, and Jacob's name made trickster, one who tricks somebody. Remember, his mom tricked both Esau and Isaac out of giving a blessing Isaac meant for Esau and to get it to Jacob, cause all kinds of problems. Well, her brother Laban, who was Jacob's uncle, might have taken the cake as far as being a big manipulator. So Jacob is hiding out away from Esau because Esau wants to kill him, and he's with his uncle Laban. Well, Jacob fell in love with his cousin Rachel, okay, and he wanted to marry her, who was Laban's daughter. So he came to his uncle Laban and said, "Listen, I love Rachel. I'd like to marry her." And Laban said, "Well, okay, but under conditions. I'm not just going to give my daughter to you. If you work for me for 7 years, then after the 7 years of working for me, I will give you my daughter Rachel to marry." And Jacob was happy to do this because he loved her. So he worked for Laban for 7 years. Now, on the day he's supposed to get married to Rachel, after working for Laban for 7 years, on the wedding day, Laban brings out her older sister Leah for Jacob to marry. Jacob said, "What are you doing? What do you mean I'm going to marry Leah? You know I'm in love with Rachel. I worked for you for 7 years to marry Rachel." Laban said, technicality. In my family, the custom and tradition is the oldest daughter has to get married first. So, if you want to marry Rachel, you can, but you have to marry my older daughter Leah first. And then, if you still want to marry Rachel, you can, but you have to work another 7 years for me. And then I'll give you my daughter, Rachel, to marry. Boy, what a bait and switch, huh? But Jacob did it because he loved Rachel. So now, there's more problems. He's got 2 wives who are sisters. He's got one wife, Leah, who he doesn't love, and the only reason why he married her was so that he'd be able to marry her sister, Rachel, 7 years later, who he does love. You can read that in Genesis chapters 29 to 31. Now God came one night in the form of a man, and Jacob began to wrestle with this man. Jacob and God wrestled all night long. When God saw Jacob would not give up, he touched Jacob's hip socket and caused his hip socket to pop out of joint. This caused Jacob to limp for the rest of his life and remind him of the day he wrestled with God. Jacob still would not stop wrestling with God until God blessed him. God asked Jacob his name, and he said Jacob. And then God said to Jacob, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and men and have prevailed." That's Genesis chapter 32, verse 27 to 28. So God changed Jacob's name to Israel, and Jacob would be the first person to form and establish the country of Israel. They would all come from his offspring. God then finally blessed Jacob as Jacob asked him to. God later appeared to Jacob and reaffirmed what he told Jacob on the night that they wrestled. And God said this to Jacob, "Your name is Jacob, no longer shall you be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I'll give the land to your offspring after you. That's in Genesis chapter 35, verse 9 and 12. Jacob would go on to have 12 sons. We're going to read about that more next week. And the 12 sons would go on to form the 12 tribes of Israel, which would form the country of Israel. Kings would come from his descendants, as God promised Abraham. You'd have King David, King Solomon, King Rehoboam, more kings, but even more importantly, one of Abraham's descendants, and therefore Isaac's and Jacob's descendants, would also be Jesus Christ, who would save the world from their sins. That's it for today. When we meet next week, we're going to hear about Jacob's 12 sons, and one son in particular, which is one of the coolest stories, one of my favorite stories in the Bible, the story of Joseph. Now, if you would like to follow me in any way, if you would like to contact me in any way, you can do that by going on the internet and typing in, it's all one word, teachingthebible.net. Again, one word, teachingthebible.net. That way you can follow me, you could reach me if you want to talk about my radio shows, my TV shows, my books, my Bible teaching. If you want to, connect with me in any way, I'd love to hear from you. Well, listen, it was great talking with you today. I hope you join us again next week. Again, we're going to learn about the story of Joseph, which is a really great story. God bless all of you. Again, this is Teaching the Bible with Michael Koch. Take care. Bye-bye.
DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon.